Hey, CNFers, as you know, the Frontrunner is available for pre-order. The Life of Steve Prefontaine. If you have a few extra bucks and you care to read it, consider pre-ordering it from the bookseller of your choice. And also promotional support for the podcast is brought to you by the Power of Narrative Conference. A couple weeks' time at the end of this month, 26th annual conference over March 28th and 29th. Hundreds of journalists from around the world descend on Boston University. Keynote speakers include Susan Orlean, Connie Schultz, Dan Zach, and Connie Chung. Listeners to this podcast can get 15% off the enrollment fee by using the code CNF15. To learn more, go to combeyond.bu.edu and use that CNF15 code.
Up and, depressed.
I like to write books that sound more like someone telling a story over a campfire.
Then you got to keep moving on because tick-tick, tick-tock.
This is going to have to interest somebody somewhere other than me.
Oh, hey, CNFers, look who came by the podcast. It's Neko Case, the musician, the songwriter, founding member of the new Pornographers, a Grammy-nominated artist. Her new memoir is The Harder I Fight, The More I Love You. It's published by Grand Central. It's a wonderful book with these great little flourishes of sentences. To use a cooking term, it kicks ass. This is the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, a show where I speak to badass people about the art and craft of telling true stories. You might even say, I talk to the tellers of true tales about the true tales they tell. This book deals with themes of loneliness, finding one's place, the development and maturity of a young woman who was an unwanted child. Animals saved her, so did music, and the book really is a testament to a flame that won't, nay, can't, burn out. Show notes to this episode and more at brendanamara.com. Hey, there you can read blog posts, my anti-social media feed, sign up for the flagship newsletter, The Rage Against the Algorithm, book recs, cool links, hot goss. It's all there. My latest issue, The Anatomy of a Book Advance, was a pretty popular one with subscribers. Got a lot of feedback, and it shed a bit of light into the mechanics of mine for the Prefontaine book. Next one could be different. Could be less, could be more. My living situation could change. You never know. Stay tuned. Also, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm experimenting with it, so bear with me. I know. I just threw up a little in my mouth. I'm starting a podcast-specific email Substack. I'm starting an email-specific creative nonfiction podcast.substack.com. That will come out as a companion for each interview. Full transcripts, nearly accurate. They're never going to quite get there, but close enough. A bit more sauce for each episode. And I think I'm going to put the parting shot in there too. It'll be like show notes on juice. I might scrap it after a few months, who knows. But I like the idea of each podcast having its own little newsletter. My mistake a few months ago was taking my existing Rager audience, doing it once a week to coincide with the pod, and I lost a significant chunk of my list that I'm only now reclaiming. So, starting this new list, and maybe that'll appeal to you if you want transcripts, the parting shot, and other podcast ephemera. All right, so since Neko didn't have a Chrome browser, which is a prerequisite to record with my Zencaster software, we couldn't record on my usual portal, if you will. So we had to use Zoom, and I don't have a fancy Zoom account. For those in the know, that means you only get 40 minutes. So I had to cut this conversation off just shy of 40 minutes, the raw tape. So Neko was laying in her hotel bed, wrung out from an onslaught of book media and the exhaustion that comes with having to talk about yourself all the time with weirdos like me. So that's where we're at. Stay tuned for a parting shot on luck. But for now, here's the indomitable spirit of the one and only Neko Case riff. You write that it is my first book, and I'm so excited and nervous about it. And you're someone who's written a lot of music, performed in front of a lot of people, but this one, it made you nervous in a different way. And I was wondering maybe you can explain how this compares or how this one has made you nervous in an entirely new way.
Never written a book before. Don't know if anybody's going to want to read it, especially because it's about me specifically. And I don't know about you, but when I think about talking about myself in front of people, it's like, oh no, I could think of something way more exciting to talk about and not bore the crap out of them. So I think people are just hesitant to talk about themselves in that regard. If I had my druthers, I never would have written a memoir because it wouldn't occur to me. I when I heard that there was going to be a book offer from Hachette Grand Central, I initially was like, oh, I would love to write fiction, and I have been working on a book for a long time. And so, then we came to the first meetings, and they wanted a memoir, and they said, we're going to pay you to write a memoir. And I said, memoir it is. It was the height of COVID. I really needed money. And that sounds like I'm saying that I didn't like the idea or that they twisted my arm, which was not the case at all. I just pivoted. I was like, oh, well, I've never done that. I don't know how that's going to be, but I'm willing to try it. And luckily I had Colin Dickerman, who was the person who gave me the book deal, who's my main editor, was so helpful. And then I worked with an incredible editor and author named Carrie Fry, who made the whole experience really fun, because writing is one of the funner things to me. I love doing it, but writing about myself, it's hard to just not kind of sometimes feel like you're driving through mud and going, this is so boring. Who wants to know this? So Carrie was great at giving me prompts and helping me like get my car out of the mud, kind of a thing.
It's especially true, talking about your own words or the story just feels boring to you, and especially after you've gone through so many drafts, you're like you've kind of lose the electricity of it after a while, just from your own lens. And so how did you persevere through that, wondering whether, like, oh my God, is this any good?
I became friends with Carrie, and I had a lot of faith and a lot of trust in her. And I went into a contractual marriage basically with Colin Dickerman. And, I didn't do that lightly. That was also a researched and very trustworthy relationship. So, at that point, you got to put your money where your mouth is, and you have to go, I've hired you to help me. You've hired me to write for you. We have to trust each other, and we have to have the same end goal. So it worked out.
Memoir done well is a slice of a life. And most of this takes place in your childhood and your adolescence and young adulthood. When did it crystallize for you to focus in that particular, or those particular moments of your life and your early upbringing?
Well, I focused on a lot more than actually ended up in the book, and then they were kind of cherry picked from what I did write. So I kind of overwrote, and then the help of Carrie and Colin, it was whittled down to something more cohesive, I think.
What was refreshing about your book also is that, when memoirs come out from musicians, a lot of people think it's kind of like, the classic rock memoir of that particular archetype. And, this one, if I didn't know you were a musician, this just reads like a really good memoir who, happens to be a musician as well, but not like this origin story of how to play in front of thousands of people. So was that on your mind, just to steer clear of that particular sort of well-worn road?
I'm not like Fleetwood Mac. You know how Fleetwood Mac being Fleetwood Mac as people is a story enough. And sometimes they get to the music. Like, I don't know. I just didn't have, like, I'm not a super exciting person. Like I spend all my time working, and I work on a very exciting thing. So that's where it gets a little confusing. It's like, oh, well, it's musician, it's music, it's all this other stuff. But mostly I was more interested in what it was about creativity and about making things that was so heightened and so, igniting, as far as, the feeling of joy or energy. Like, how does joy and creation become an engine for you?
Yeah, and you saying not being a super exciting person. Again, I think I've read somewhere from it might be Austin Kleon, and he might have quoted someone else who was saying like, I like to be boring in life and very exciting in my art. And is that something that you kind of adhere to too? Like if you can lead, you can turn the dial up on your art if you're able to kind of keep maybe a governor on the engine of your normal life.
Well, I think, my friends would say differently. I think that I'm a fun person if you're
Right.
one of my friends, but I don't want to overwhelm every stranger I meet. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want to overwhelm the person serving you dinner in a restaurant. Like you want to be kind and polite and maybe have a conversation with them if they're willing to do it, but it's not, I don't need to do that for everyone, because as a human being, your energy has limits.
For sure.
You gotta budget your energy.
And in the book too, what struck me as almost a theme, if you want to call it that, is a real palpable sense of loneliness and aloneness. And I think you write about this particularly well. And that struck a chord with me as someone, just as a child of divorce and spending a lot of time on my own, latchkey kid and all
Yep.
that. I got a sense of that loneliness. And I wonder, just for you, at what point where you were like, oh, this is definitely a part of my childhood I really want to lean on for as an engine for the story.
Well, I mean, it's kind of all I had to lean on, because that was most of my childhood. I spent most
Yeah.
of my childhood by myself, the bulk of it. So there wasn't really an alternate experience to really go from, you know what I mean?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, yeah, and I think early on too, you really had a connection with animals and horses too, and I think and it probably let your imagination go wild too. It's like, in what way did you try to become your own best friend, just to keep yourself company, or animals to have give you that comfort?
Well, it was never a conscious choice that I made, because I was a little kid. And when you're a little kid, you're very involved in the doing and the moving forward, rather than like planning your time. At least I wasn't. I mean, there's probably kids like that who like to plan their time, but I was a very in the moment person. And, those moments were just really, really, really long. But animals were always consistent, always. They were always glad to see you. They were
Mm.
always friendly. And I was so bonded with them. And they helped raise me, for sure.
There's a section of the book also where you're with one of your friends, and I believe her mother. I believe the mother was named Eileen. Is that correct? Or yeah. And
Yeah.
I love when you are spending time with them and you're exposed to just an entirely different breed of love. And I maybe just like take us to that moment of just like what, just how disorienting that must have been to experience, how other families coexist and exist with each other.
I felt like being in a warm shower. You know how when suddenly you're in the shower and you feel your shoulders disconnect from your neck, and you just savor that feeling of being in warm water. It's felt like that. I felt like I was
Yeah.
thawing out a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It felt so good. It wasn't until I was about like there was that moment, and then there was a big gulf between that moment and being like 21 and meeting people after being really into punk rock and music and stuff, meeting people whose parents were okay with that and liked them and were interested in their friends. So that was like, there was like the second wave of that happened too.
Yeah,
Which was
that's wild.
cool.
Yeah, yeah, and I liked also the a moment where you bond with another young man who was like working on cars. I'm blanking on his name, but the two of you were just kind of like two lonely spirits, just enjoying each other's company, like fixing cars. And I thought that was a really touching moment of like true friendship that didn't. It didn't need anything else other than your company and them working on cars. I just thought that was a really good illustration of like what that means when two people who are kind of introverted and kind of shy find each other and find a common interest.
Yeah. And he was quite a bit older than me too. So,
Mm-hmm.
it was my friends were a little worried about it. Like, what are you doing hanging out with this older guy? Like, they were like, does he have ulterior motives? And I was like, nah. And he didn't. And so we really just liked hanging out, working on cars and talking about cars and having a cigarette and drinking a beer while working on a car. It was a really good feeling.
Yeah. And I always like talking about sometimes like the headspace of a writer or a creative person. In particular, jealousy is always a good thread to pull on. And that was one of there are a couple passages in the book that really struck me. First one was when when you had met Jennifer Finch. There's an awesome passage of this, the entire book. The way you interface there and the jealousy that you were feeling and kind of how your hackles were raised because you weren't at her stage and you were seeing yourself as less than in that moment. You hadn't quite arrived. And it was like, maybe you can take us to that moment and just kind of those feelings that you were feeling at that time.
Well, I had a boyfriend who was a tour manager for a very popular band, and we would run into people all the time, and women who were really, well revered in music in that regard, like especially in that kind of music scene, was pretty rare. But I remember meeting her, and it's nothing she would ever even remember. I can't. There's no way I'm sure she would remember it, and I'm glad because I was kind of like a weirdo. So I would want to put that on her. That's not her thing. But she seemed like a really nice person, and she was so outgoing and comfortable in her own skin. And I remember just thinking like, no, I'm not ready to meet you yet. I'm not done. I'm not like, when I'm at your level, I want to meet you. But right now, I just feel like your burning flame is too hot for me, which is so stupid because what I learned from that is, no, the burning flame is a warm place to be, and you should not be weird about meeting. I mean, I think it was just, I grew up at a time, well, a different flavor of misogyny, patriarchal loathing. Like I was definitely brought up to be a misogynist. Like there's not room for more than a couple of women. So clearly you're taking up my spot. There was a lot of that. And it's not, it's ridiculous. It's so fabricated. And then when you realize you've been that way, you just loathe yourself. You're like, oh, I've been feeling this way about this other person that I don't even know for no good reason. Like competitive behavior, that's sports. And I want nothing to do with that shit. Like, like that whole competitive thing, like I'm on this team, you're on that team. I hate it. I think it's so childish and so unhealthy. I don't mean like let's play tennis together, or like let's go play touch football. Like that stuff is fun, but the weird competitive, I was definitely that weird male sports competitive, and it just made me sick. Like it was not healthy.
Now, given that you've been a professional touring musician for a few decades, have you been on the other side of that where maybe you've sensed a similar pang from, say, like another up and coming artist now that you're far more established?
No, I'm hoping that I kind of came along at the tail end of that, where people weren't. I find that I see women really supporting other women in music. Like we've kind of figured out like, oh, that was a scam. Yeah, that was bad. And, the feeling of supporting other women is so rewarding that I can't imagine it any other way. That other way is just like this weird, you're starving yourself to death in a hateful little prison. That doesn't work for anybody.
Right. Yeah, and kind of piggybacking on that feeling, you write kind of a little bit later in the book. There's an ugliness that can exist in making music, a jealous competitiveness of which you've just alluded to, that can infect you when you lack confidence and make you feel like the only way to win is for someone else to lose. Over time, though, I got better at steering forward, not perfect, just better. And when did that click for you?
At one point I was called out by another woman that I knew in my local music scene. She was kind of like, so nasty to me.
Hmm.
I was like, you know what? I don't have a good reason, and I'm really sorry.
Mm.
I said, I think I was just jealous of you. And it felt so good to say. And I was so grateful that she said it to me.
Yeah.
And we became friends, and it was great.
I like this other moment too, where you kind of had this battle of the bands thing going on, and then you guys were advancing, and at one point you were like, we suck, we won't win anyway. And then I think one of your bandmates was like, do not say that shit anymore. We work just as hard, we practice and care, but what you're saying is fucked up and takes away from what we're doing. In some ways, there I get a sense of like sometimes as creative people we can be, as much as we are afraid of failure, sometimes we can be afraid of success also. And is that
Totally.
something you've experienced?
Yeah, just fear of everything.
Yeah.
It's embarrassing to be in the spotlight. Like, I don't know that it's a natural. Some people love it, and some people are just really comfortable in it, and some people are terrified of it, and the whole spectrum of feelings about it. But I feel comfortable enough in it to be myself, but beyond that, I'm not a reveler or a hammy person. I don't think so. I would love to be that freewheeling, because people who are kind of like that are often some of the funnier, people.
Mm-hmm.
Enjoy.
I always like talking to writers about kind of the routines or rituals through which they start to organize their day so they can actually get some work done and get words down on the page. How did you approach the writing of this book?
Well, I had a really bizarre and freak thing happen where I've been a night owl my whole life, always the kind of person who was up until 3 a.m. and couldn't wake up very well before 10 a.m. And my whole life I was like that. And then right at the beginning of starting to write this book, my body just decided it gets up at 5 now, which has to do with menopause, which has to do with, hormones shifting and all that other stuff. But I really lucked out because waking up at 5 a.m., I love it. And that's when I would do most of my work. I would just wake up, make myself a coffee, get back into bed, write for a while with like animals all over me, just pinning me. I was like, well, I can't move them. I might as well just keep working. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I used them as an excuse to just keep going.
Oh, nice. I'm blanking on the poet's name right now. I was watching the publisher Tin House in Grey Wolf. They did this kind of spring catalog thing online where it was just like they feature some of their authors who have books coming out, and he did a lot of his writing in his bed, which he called the soft office. Which I thought was great. And you saying writing in your bed, I'm like, oh, it's a soft office.
Yeah, and like every single thing you write about being an effective person says don't write in your bed, but I'm sorry. It feels good. Just write in your bed if you want to.
Yeah. And whenever you encroach on the inherent self-doubt that comes with writing, narrative and writing memoir in particular, you've had decades of experience of writing songs, but this is an altogether different muscle, I imagine. So when you encroached upon that boundary, how did you push through that and still achieve what you set out to do?
I would have to attribute that to Carrie Fry, who would always just make it fun and remind me of other things. Because like I said, thinking about myself isn't something I'm like, I'm going to think about myself a whole lot and then I'm going to write it down for other people. I don't know how natural that is. It's a little weird.
Yeah. When there's I like to I think it's page 184 at least of the copy of the book that I had, early copy. You talk about writing a song and constructing a song and kind of building out the world of it and working forward and backward and everything. And I wonder just for you how the two processes compare, be it songwriting and the world building there, and then memoir writing and the world you're building in that sandbox.
Well, the world building and songwriting is from scratch, and then the world building in the writing is from photographs. Like there's a realism that I really kind of put the screws to myself, like get the realism. And then I kind of realized, not everybody needs to know what color the bedspread was or if it's exactly factually correct. Just get the most of it you can in there and not be such a control freak.
And when you were setting out, various, story beats and just trying to extract from your deep memory, what were some exercises you did? You mentioned photographs, but to rekindle those fires, to get to that place of truth and experience, how did you, best mine your memory? If you have any exercises you did that are particularly effective?
Well, I took a lot of courses from Linda Berry, who's one of my favorite writers and cartoonists and artists in general of all time. And she is an absolute genius at coming up with ways to jog your memory or to make something more fun. Like make a list of all the cars you can remember of your childhood, or, those things ignite so much and rekindle so much of what there was. And they're little detailed gateways into places that you might not be able to get into from another direction. I would like, if anybody wanted to try those, and writing by hand is really good for you too, because your hand is doing something it knows how to do and your brain is a little freer. So I would say if anybody was looking for a way, any of Linda Berry's books about memory or creative writing, or, writing the unthinkable, what is this, or just any Linda Berry is so inspiring.
Books are kind of made of books, and they inform us. Whatever you read, you're like, oh, I kind of want to, maybe I can model after that. And I wonder, just for you, what were some memoirs that you've read where that, like, oh, that struck a note that you wanted to kind of hit with your own?
Well, I mean, Patti Smith's Just Kids is something that I'm like, well, you'll never do that good, but it's the bar, and also I was so embroiled in and delighted by Ricky Lee Jones's autobiography, Last Chance Texaco. I couldn't put it down, and I just loved the way it read, and I loved her empathy for her young self and her compassion. And she's just a phenomenal writer, as Patti Smith is too. So, I really looked up to them for these particular chores.
Oh, and you say empathy for, her young self. When you were writing, your own, to what extent or what empathy did you experience for your younger self?
I've always had a lot of empathy for young me. It was hard to figure things out without any guidance. And so, I didn't want to be dishonest or make myself the star of everything. But I did want to outline how sometimes boundaries are so dull. They're not like spiky barbed wire like you would expect. There are other things that are just really, that grind you down. And I also wanted to talk a lot about the joy, like it's not a bummer of a book. It's just, it has both dark and light and the things in between.
I heard the other day on your appearance on the Modern Love podcast, and you read an essay of this one woman who wanted to forgive her mom for just for her own story. I believe the writer's name was Katie McCormick. I'll fact check that when I'm done. But it struck you because you're like, I have no room for forgiveness for my own mother. And, in writing this book, did you reach a place of establishing that forgiveness is off the table? Did you ever hit a point of empathy and for her, even though you don't care to forgive?
Well, there was a lot of forgiving I did of my mother over the years, and there was a lot of empathy and a lot of compassion. I forgave her for a lot of things. Like, it's not her fault that her young life was so horrible and she was so abused and terrible things happened to her. What I did not forgive her for was coming back time and time and time again after abandoning me, pretending that she was going to be a part of my life and wanted to be a part of my life, which she would then rescind on a dime. I thought that was cruel. Mm-hmm. It's absolutely something that was she didn't have to do that and didn't really care how much it messed with me. So, the forgiveness, I think I'm talking more about not so much like somebody being imperfect, just when people won't take responsibility for that and they don't care about the effect it has, especially if you're going to make the decision to go through with having a kid, you got to really think about it. Being an unwanted child is a horrible place to be.
You write about that extremely well and poignantly. And what I think you do especially well too, and you kind of alluded to it a moment ago, how you don't, being the center of your own story, you don't necessarily want to be the hero of it, because that's almost makes memoir unreadable when the narrator is the hero. But because so many horrible things happen to you, it's like, yeah, we're with you along that sort of unwanted child trajectory. So just how did you ensure that, you didn't come across as it's sort of an unsavory hero of your own story? And I'm having a hard time articulating it, but you do it particularly well. And it sounds like your antenna were attuned to that frequency.
Well, it sounds like what you're asking is like, how hard is it to be unbiased? And are we even capable of being unbiased?
Yeah.
I don't think we're capable of being unbiased about our parents, but
yeah,
when things go a certain way, like I'm not going to get the story exactly right. I'm not going to get my mother's perspective exactly right. So much was done with no care or concern with how it would affect my life. I don't feel any obligation toward kindness other than trying to be honest.
Towards the end, you write on being a little bit strange, of having fur and teeth and the shadows of the forest flickering across the back of your eyelids. And it's just a really sort of great animalistic coda to the book too. And I wonder, like, as you're coming to the sort of the revelation of being comfortable in that skin that you grew into, just how you arrive at that kind of moment in the story. So what was it about that really struck you as a really satisfying way to bring the book down for a landing?
Well, I've never felt like a wholly just a human being, not because I'm not one, but because the way our society has divorced human beings from animals and from nature. It's a very sad place for our species to be. We're just standing on the outside, and it's the reason that we have horrible things like climate change, the climate change that is not the natural climate change that also happens, but the kind where you're talking about greenhouse gases and horrible wildfires in California and flooding in Vermont and, North Carolina. We do not understand our world. And it is so sad. It is a parent to us. It is a family to us. And it is so nourishing and kind, while at the same time, it is not taking us personally. And we tend to, I think, just try to make everything human-like from a human lens. So we lack understanding, and it's so lonely, and we don't know why we're so lonely. We don't question it. We just live in a forward and consume a lot of plastic, and it brings me great sadness. But I, as a younger person, remembered and still remember and still, kind of hang around with nature and animals every day. And I feel very held by them. I feel very at home with that. And I want that for everyone, because it's so healthy. It's so reinvigorating. And I think it would make a lot of our societal collective depression kind of ebb. It would be really, really lovely.
And and Neko, as I bring these conversations down for a landing, I always love asking the guests, you in this case, for just like a recommendation for the listeners. And that can just be anything that you're excited about. It could be like a brand of coffee or a brand of socks or a long walk. I would leave that up to you, what you would recommend for the listeners.
Well, I just finally, after owning the book since it came out, have finally started getting to read Split Tooth by Tanya Tagaq, who I absolutely adore as an artist and a musician. And her writing is so beautiful, and the illustrations in the book are by Jaime Hernandez of Love and Rockets, and it's just a perfect book. And I just feel like I have a friend in my bag with me, and I'm reading it very slowly because I don't want it to end.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thanks for the time. Thanks for coming on this little old podcast.
Well, thanks for having me on your podcast. I know it's no small thing, and I appreciate you talking about my book and supporting a fellow artist. I mean, that's why we're here. This is the good stuff, you know?
Yes. Thanks to Neko for slumming it, and thanks to the Power of Narrative Conference for their promotional support. If you're feeling froggy, you can always go to the bookseller of your choice and pre-order The Frontrunner. And now, for a limited time, or maybe forever, I don't know, there's the podcast-specific Substack. Creative Nonfiction Podcast.substack.com. Sign-up form or embed or whatever the hell will be at brendanmayer.com. Hey. All right, I might blog about this or write about it for a magazine, a writing magazine, but I think I need to talk about it. And it's this thing called luck. A long time ago, I used to think that to get by in life, or to get ahead in life, it was a matter of hard work. End of sentence. This is a time when I didn't understand mechanics of patriarchy and certainly privilege, that even though I grew up lower middle class, being a white cisgendered male meant I was born on third base. End of sentence. Or maybe on second base with a really good secondary lead, but let's say third base. My Prefontaine book only came into existence out of luck. Like, truly. I happened to start a podcast in 2013. I slogged my way through for more than a decade. I have a spouse who's the breadwinner, which kind of allowed me to not have to give up and just go elsewhere with my career to make ends meet. I did at times, which is, I think, why my timeline is so protracted and weird. I happened to meet a friend who thought it unacceptable that I didn't have an agent. She put me in touch with one agent who didn't care for me, and then she put me in touch with another, one who told me I wasn't famous enough to publish a memoir, but was I working on something that might be more commercial. I happened to be keeping tabs on a Prefontaine project ahead of the 50th anniversary of his death in 3 years' time. And boom, she said she could sell out on proposal. And she knew an editor who was a marathoner. And there happened to be nothing written on Prefontaine for decades. Luck all the way down. But here's where the hard work and perseverance enters. You have to be ready for when luck strikes. You have to have a foundation, a desire to put in the time and the hours. Hard work isn't the only answer. It's table stakes, really. But it's not the answer that a lot of people who just think, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, son. That's all it takes. If you're not where you want to be, you just have to work harder. I'll never forget, I have a niece who is kind of indoctrinated under that kind of ethos. And they had gotten a Peloton bike for Christmas a few years ago. And I was like, oh, this is cool. I would love one of these things. And she was like, better work harder. And I was like, do you want to say that again? That's what I thought. I didn't say that, but she was like 11 years old. I was like, what? Anyway, some have to work harder than others. I think I'm kind of lazy compared to many people. But if luck taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, B.O., it's your turn. What are you going to do with me? Can you hang on to me? And more importantly, how will you try and make others lucky? Setting aside the sophomoric humor lucky invites, this is the power of luck and how we can let its residue rub off on others as well. You see people who get certain jobs, and maybe there's a guy who's like 3 years from retirement, and you're right at the edge, right at the age to fill that slot when that person sunsets their career. I think of TV anchors. It's all about timing if you want to anchor the CBS Evening News. You have to be young but not too old, and you have to be kind of peaking at the time that, I don't know, Dan Rather is ready to retire. Metallica's timing was luck. Nirvana's timing was luck. Will the culture be ready for you when you're doing your thing at the height of your powers? And how best to court luck? I think learning new skills is paramount. I'm slowly starting to learn video. And years ago, I taught myself audio, and that has gotten me to a certain point. You can always get better, of course, but I took that upon myself. I'm not a radio guy. I just taught myself how to do it through sheer repetition and force of will. It gave me an audience that I could leverage into a book and hopefully many more. Batman had more than a grappling hook in his utility belt. Meeting people and serving the community courts luck. Being generous and the kind of person people want to help courts luck. And if you're lucky to find some luck, you can't hoard it. Don't be a hanger-on. Don't lurk. Be a leader. Doesn't mean you have to lead armies into battle, so to speak. It could just mean a little bit of your community. Recognize the gift you've been given if you're lucky enough to have received it. Luck is infinite if you give it a chance. Your luck doesn't mean I get less luck. Luck multiplies, it amplifies, it can be painfully slow. Then it can be at like the speed of light. And then it might disappear for a long time. It might never come back. It's really frustrating that way. It just is. And I wish you good luck. And I'll keep doing my best to pass whatever luck I come across along. So stay wild or lucky, CNFers. And if you can't do interviews, see ya.